Hi, my name is Doris Fuchs. I'm speaker of the Center for Interdisciplinary Sustainability Research and Professor of International Relations and Sustainable Development at the University of Münster in Germany, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Sustainable Consumption teaching series. Here's what I want to talk about today. I'm first going to argue that sustainable development inherently integrates notions of justice, boundaries, and the good life. And from that, I'm going to develop and explain the concept of sustainable consumption corridors. And I'm going to embed the concept in the literature, and I'm going to close with some challenges ahead of us. Now, let's start. Sustainable development, as I argue, inherently entails notions of justice, boundaries, and the good life. The Brundtland Commission already defined sustainable development as intra- and intergenerational justice. And we all know that sustainable development, a sustainable existence of humankind on the earth entails respecting the planetary boundaries we're facing. And finally, it's not just about the mere existence of humanity on the earth, but it's about the ability of individuals to live a good life on earth now and in the future. So, taking these elements together, I'm now going to develop the notion of sustainable consumption corridors in 3 steps. First, to be able to live a good life, an individual needs to have access to a certain quality and quantity of ecological and social resources. So it needs a certain quality and quantity of food, of water, of meaningful social relations. And that means we need to respect a certain minimum consumption standard. This is the minimum consumption that is necessary for an individual to satisfy her needs and to be able to live a good life. Now, in a world of scarce, if not finite resources, one individual or group of individuals' consumption impacts the other individual's abilities to meet their needs, to their consumption abilities. And so thirdly, from a normative point of view, no individual in this world should be able to consume to an extent that it endangers others' abilities to meet their minimum consumption needs. So to endanger their ability to live a good life. And that means we also need to talk about maximum consumption standards, something that relates to what Sylvia Lorek was talking about in terms of strong sustainable consumption. Now, the space between the minimum and the maximum is what we call sustainable consumption corridors. And these corridors are likely to change over time in their minima and maxima. It's going to change by what we know about, or what we agree on, what our individual needs, and what is necessary to live a good life. It's also going to change by our knowledge of external conditions, by the external conditions present. So over time, these corridors may contract and they may widen. Importantly, within the space between the minimum and the maximum, there is freedom of choice. And justice in the context of corridors means ensuring that every individual can meet the minimum consumption needs. It does not mean that everybody necessarily has to have the same in the end. So this is the notion of consumption corridors, and we can think of defining these corridors perhaps in terms of resources such as carbon emissions. We can think of them in terms of being defined by needs, for instance, or in terms of being defined by sectors, such as mobility of food. This is not yet decided, and I very much invite you to join the discussion and work on this and think about how would we define such corridors. Where does the concept come from, and how does it relate to other concepts in the literature? Well, its origin is in a large research effort funded by the German Federal Ministry for Education and Research under the heading Sustainable Consumption from Knowledge to Action. And scholars working in this emphasis and in an accompanying research project published a book, Consumption Messages, Konsumbotschaften, and the corridor message was one of these messages in terms of what will be necessary for us all to be able to live a sustainable life on this planet. In its effort to relate planetary boundaries and justice to each other, the concept is not alone. It relates to Kate Raworth's living in the economy, donut economy. It relates to safe and just operating spaces concept. It relates to the environmental spaces concept. It's different from those in that it focuses on consumption squarely. It puts consumption at the center. Importantly, not the consumer. It doesn't attribute all responsibility to the consumer. It's consumption. Consumption as a system, consumption as a culture, consumption as a global infrastructure, and with a global political economy behind it, with all its drivers and power asymmetries and so on. But that it puts consumption center. The other difference is a smaller difference to the other concept is that it's more dynamic in terms of time, and that it very much insists that we need to look at ecological and social resources, both in terms of the minimum and the maximum standards. Challenges ahead are quite a few. First of all, we need to have some form of societal dialogue on the needs, on the good life, on what that implies in terms of minimum consumption standards. From there, we need to talk about maximum consumption standards. And finally, then we need to talk about processes of implementation, of actors involved, of instruments involved, and so on. So there's a lot of work that remains to be done. I very much invite you to join us. And with that, I say goodbye for today.